Well, he was faster than Barney, and usually could get the best of him. And cause Vincent hit with a straight punch, and with his right and left bow, well, Barney could kind of punch with his left arm straight out, but when he hit with his right, well, it had to be a haymaker. But let me tell you, when he hit at you with those haymakers, you wanted to look out. So Vincent hit him a few times, and Barney poked at him, and now in a minute, well, Vincent didn't get out of the way fast enough, and old Barney started a haymaker from way back there, and he brought it over, and he hit him right square in the chin. And you know, Vincent's feet went up and hit into those cherry limbs above their heads, and so his feet went over 6 feet high when he went up into that air. Well, now, old Vincent was tough, because if he hadn't have been, that wallop would have knocked him cold as a wedge. And it didn't knock him out, but it hurt him. And so he really had to watch out the rest of that fight, because old Barney he never really got over it till after Ernie says, well, I think that's enough, because old Barney really did hurt him. And then after the fight was over, old Barney went whistling back up the road. And Ernest told Vincent, says, well, that was kind of a little slip up, wasn't it? Old Vin says, yes, it was. He says, daggone. But says, he did hit me an awful wallop. Yeah, Ernest says, when your feet will go up 6 feet high, well, you're bound to be hit hard. Old Vincent says the stars just danced and sprangled all around. And he says, you know, it is a while before I could do very much. Ernest says, yeah, I knew that. And he said, he kind of battered you around after that. Vincent says, yes, he did. Says, that's one time that I didn't get off very good. And he says, I don't believe I even left any marks on him for that little old girl to see when he goes back up home. Well, now, the next boy was Arthur. Now, he had the darkest hair of any of us in the bunch, and he was just even 6 feet. But he was fairly slender built. And Arthur only weighed about 165 pounds. But he was, I guess, more athletic for a lot of things than any of the boys. Because when he was in high school, he went out to Pampa, Texas to stay with Uncle Wiley Vincent. That was one of my mother's brothers. And he had 3 boys, and one of them was just a little younger than Arthur, and then 2 of them older. And he went to school there, and he run long-distance foot races. He wasn't good for a short sprint, but he run long distance, and he won quite a lot of ribbons there in long-distance running. And then he came on back, and he worked at the mines a lot. And then he got married at fairly young, I think 22 or 3 years old, and was just getting, and hadn't done much hunting with the hounds. And Clell and I went up to New Mexico then, and then when Ernest and Vincent and Guy Mayer and Arthur came up there, and he was just getting real interested in hunting with the hounds when we treed that line, and Guy Mayer killed him at the tree, as you know about now. And so that ended his career as a hunter. But I believe Arthur would have made a real good hunter, and he was really getting interested after he'd been in on a line catch or two of becoming a line hunter. Now, when they come up there, the intentions was that I was going to come home for a while, and he was going to take my place up there and stay with Clell. And I think that would have really got him started. Well, Gary, you've met Clell, and you know what kind of a looking fellow Clell was, so I won't explain anything about how he looked or how big he was or anything. And to me, he was a mighty fine man. And one thing about it, he never did carouse any time in his life, and he never did drink any whiskey or beer or smoke cigarettes or anything at all of his life. Nearly all the rest of them, well, they drank a little, and some of them smoked a lot. And so you know all about that. To me, he was one of his finest, honest men that I ever knew. And not because he was a brother, but just because he was who he was. And he and I made many hunts together, and it was Ernest and Vincent and Clell and I that were really the hunters. Bill hunted a little bit. Barney, being married so young, he never did get to hunt big game with the hounds. I don't think Barney was ever in on a lion or a bear kill. When he first was right young, he had a hound or two, but he couldn't do nothing with them, so he got rid of them. And but we did go on a few deer hunts together, and Barney and I went a few times together deer hunting, but he never, I don't believe that he was ever in on a lion or a bear hunt. And so that's about all about him, because you know all about him, and or you know a lot about him anyway. And so that takes up all the guys, all the boys and the girl, and down to me. And of course, you know me. Now, this is a little bit about our mother. Now, she was a medium complected with, well, she'd had light brown hair, and she had blue eyes. And she was a woman of probably, I don't remember how tall she was, but she wasn't tall, near like her sister Leela. I imagine Mother was only about 5. I imagine 5.5. She might have been a little taller, and medium build and medium weight. And she was, I think, a fine mother. Now, the main things that our father and mother both really worked into our heads, we were not to lie and steal. Now, we might get off with quite a little things that we'd done if we just look them in the eye and say, yes, we done that. But if we lied or stole anything and they found it out, that's when the work was over. And you know, I really believe that a lot that you have to do with when you're growing up is what kind of people that you'll grow up to be and what kind of men that you will amount to. And I strongly believe that. I remember one little incident I'll tell you about her mother I thought was funny. Now, we had this old bear that we called Maggie that we kept and trained our dogs on, and we would take her over about a mile from Paradise there, and sometimes we'd go on horseback and have big races with the dogs and all after old Maggie. And one time we was over there and our mother was with us, and of course she was a lady up in years then, and she was riding an old sorrel horse, big blaze-faced sorrel horse we called Shorty, of course, that was real good horse, and he was real gentle. And you know, the dogs was a-fighting the bear kind of up in a little swale, and we were kind of down, kind of out on the flats, really. And here that bear came, and you know, the dogs right after it, and it, of course, wasn't afraid of anything, horses or people or anything, and it run right down through us and run between old Shorty's front and hind legs and right on down, and all of them dogs right after, and that, by golly, we were lucky because that old horse never done a thing or never tried to hurt her mother. And anyway, and of course, after it's all over with, well, we thought that was terrible funny. But we realized that that was kind of dangerous because a lot of horses would throw the fit, something like that. And that bar was pretty good size, too, and come right in between that horse's front legs and hind legs. And the hound's right after it. Well, this is about Clell and I tying up the lines in the Santa Rita Mountains. Now, this is about 1946 or 7, somewhere along there. It is after World War II, and after that, I'd been in there and caught those for bounty when old Jose Tapia was with me, and Dink Parker owned that ranch there then. And so we had been out there and cut sign, and we knew that there were some lines there, and we found the sign of 4. Now, this was an old one and 3 young ones. And the young males were a lot bigger than their mother, and the female, I don't think, was over 10 pounds littler than her mother was. They'd almost all of them grown, but she still had them with her, and she was, I think, still doing the killing. And these males were nice. They was over 100-pound lines. So we found their sign, and we had some orders for some live lines. Now, we sold quite a few lines in them days alive. That's the reason we was roping them and tying them, which is quite a job when you just got to go up there, and they didn't know anything about tranquilizing them or anything. In those days, you just had to rope them out of the trees. Well, we were lucky for that bunch because they were down on the kind of this east end towards that Box Canyon that goes up through the Santa Ritas there by Greaterville. They were running in that country there. And it was lucky because there wasn't any big trees in there. There weren't any pines and tall trees. That was all an oak country, as you know. Well, the first day that we went out, we didn't find any fresh sign of them. But we did find some old tracks, and they were going towards that Castle Dome. And so the next morning then, real early, well, we got over there, and we hit the tracks of all 4 of them. And I'll bet we didn't trail them over 300 or 400 yards, and we found where they had killed a 4-point buck that night, of just I imagine, a 70-pound buck, nice little white-tailed buck. And you know those 4 lines I guess they were all hungry because they slicked that deer up and ate every bit of him. And you could just find some of the bones there, and they even made a lot of the bones. But the big bones and hair was all that was there, and it was done that night. So boy, on around the mountain they went, and they went into those bluffs, and we could look right over here on Tucson. And we had, I think, 8 hounds, and 6 of them were pretty fair dogs, but they weren't plumb true. And they all 6 of them run off after a deer, and they got away from us. Well, that just left us with a little red tick that I had that was an older dog, and a true dog that Clell had that he called Thunder. Well, this Thunder was a good cold trailer, but he wouldn't tree. When you'd go up to a line tree, he wouldn't be there, and when you went back to your horses, that's where he'd always be. So that hurt him as being the value of a line dog. But this little red speckled dog, he was true, and he was a good trailer, and he was a good tree dog. So we took on after him with just old Thunder. Clell called his Thunder, and he was a red speckled dog, and well, he was halfway really the color between a blue tick and a red tick. His speckles wasn't blue and they wasn't red. He was what you'd call a halfway dog. But old Red was a distinct little red tick. Thunder was a much bigger dog. Red wouldn't have weighed over, I don't believe, over 45. He possibly might went 47 or 8. But anyway, well, they trailed into a bunch of bluffs, and we were at the west end of them. So it wasn't too far to the bottom, so Clell rimmed under them, and I went back a little ways and rimmed out over the top of them. Well, when I was about halfway through those bluffs, walking up the hill, now this was in the spring of the year in good trailing conditions, right there in the soft dirt in kind of mud was a line track just walking out of those bluffs. And I could tell that it was real fresh. I think it had just been made a minute or two. And so I hurried on around and got away around there and hollered, and Clell answered me, and I hurried down there and I said, "Say, where's old Thunder and Red?" He said, "Well, they're trailing around this big ridge and going into this canyon over here on the other side of Castle Dome." I said, "Well, let's get them. I just saw a line track coming out of those bluffs, and I know that it's fresh." So we were herding around on this ridge, which wasn't too steep, just a sloping over there good. Big old juniper trees there, and by golly, a line jumped out of a big old juniper tree right in front of us. And I think that is the line that I just seen come out, and those bluffs was rimming around that way and heard those dogs and just come that tree, because there wasn't nothing after it. And it run right back towards those bluffs. Well, we hurried around there and got old Red and Thunder and brought them back, which didn't take us too long, and put them on the track, and they went to running towards those bluffs, and Clell didn't think they was running very fast. And he said, "Look at them old son of a guns." He said, "They never will catch that line." Says, "If them other son of a guns hadn't have run off, now we'd be in business." I said, "Clell, don't you worry. That line will never get away from old Red. I don't care whether he's running very fast or not. He'll catch her." So we finally got around there and got back over to those bluffs that we'd just come out of, And right down in them we heard old Red saying, "Blah, blah, 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 wow, 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 wow." And I said, "See, brother, old Red's got that line." So we got up there and got off of our mules and took our ropes and all and went down there and was going to try to rope her right in them bluffs. Well, we got up on just I imagine 8 or 10 feet above her or something, and slipped the rope down there, and old Red was right in front of her. He was a slobbering and a barking and jumping at her, and she was a slapping at him, and he was jumping back. And now the minute that line looked up and seen us, well, now the line could go down through those bluffs on those ledges, but a dog or a man couldn't. And so we got down there on the ledge with old Red and watched that line. And it just worked its way down through there. After it got down a ways, it slowed up. It wasn't a running, but it had jumped from ledge to ledge and fooled around and looked, and old Red just stood there and looked at it. Then old Clell said, "Well, he's sure excited." I said, "Well, he's just trying to see where that line's a-going." And when that line hit the bottom of those ledges, I turned around and looked at old Red. I said, "Well, Red, you better get after her if you're going to catch her." He looked at me like he knew exactly what I was doing, and he just turned and scrambled back out to the top of that bluff, and we watched him, and he just run right around the top and then got down through it over there, around there a couple of 100 yards, and right back in under there he come, and hit that line strike, and away he went, and old Thunder joined him from somewhere. And away they went, and they went off into a little canyon, and we was looking right over on Tucson. Well, we finally got down there with our animals And you know that line is just running back and forth in that canyon, and old Red and Thunder's in there after. And she just kept doubling back and forth, doubling back and forth. And finally I told Clell, I said, Clell, why don't you get off in there and scare that line out of there? I said, she might make so many tracks in there that she'd finally fool old Red. So he got off in there with her and with them, and here she come and was right in under him, and he just pulled a pistol and shot in the air. And that line just turned and doubled right back on her tracks. And when she did, well, I was sitting there watching them, she nearly run over old Red. And he saw her, and he just said, opened his mouth and said, "Roar," and turned, and after he went, well, he put her right down on, right in the open where there was nothing farmed, a tree or anything else, and put her into old Keith Brown's horse pasture in a little point down there, and old Thunder was with him, and they run him right into a little bunch of rocks, and there was a hole there. The line could just get in it down there and probably get down a foot, and that is as far as it could get, just a little hole. And she bathed in there. And he and I got down there, and there wasn't hardly any bushes or anything there. And we tied, found the bush and tied our mules and got our ropes and got down there then, and there was one little bush there pretty close, so we pulled old Red back and tied him, and old Thunder was there at the mules, and we got a hold of him and tied him and just took our doggone rope down in that hole and just instantly and had that line, had it right around its neck. And we just yanked it out of that hole. And old Clell was a good hand when it come to tying anything. And I held that line, the rope, and he grabbed it by the tail, and then in just a little bit he had those hind legs tied, and then he tied them front ones, tied all them 4 feet together, and then we grabbed a mesquite limb and cut a stick and put it in her mouth behind those canine tushes and wrapped the rope around behind the stick and tied her mouth shut. And then that way, well, they can't bite and you can't smother them. Otherwise, if you didn't have that in there, well, you might cut their ear off. But that stick pops their mouth open and they can always get air. So I was riding an old mule I called Wimpy that I just got that made one of the best hunting animals I ever rode. And he was a good big mule and he'd weigh a good amount, and I hadn't had him over a month or two, and he'd run away with you. If you'd get in the brush and the brush would get you scraping on your hat and your chaps, well, he'd just booger and stampede, so I was riding him with a ring bit. And that is a bridle that the curb strap and all is just a ring that goes right over the jaw when you put the bridle on them. And oh, they're severe. And I just had his old jaw just a solid sore plumb around. And then I'd have trouble of handling him. Well, anyway, I said, I'm going to get on old Wimpy and ride right around under you here in this little ridge, and you hand me that line and I'll put it up in front of me, and we'll go over to old Keith Brown's and see if we can borrow a pickup to take this line back to camp. We already had cages built. We knew how many lines was there, and we'd built the cages to put them in. Clell says, you can't carry that line on old Wimpy. I said, well, Clell, I got to teach him to be a hunting animal. And I'm going to try it. So he said, all right. So I got on old Wimpy and rode him right in under him, and right, the Wimpy's shoulder was right along with the line. And so Clell started to kind of lift the line up, and I kind of leaned over a little bit to take the line up in front of me. And that line growled, and old Wimpy turned around and smelt that line good, and he just snorted, and we just run right straight off of that slope. And me just a pulling on that severe bit, and trying to stop him and all. I bet we run 200 yards. And I finally got him stopped, and I just spurred him and took a double of a rope, and I whooped his hind end, and I really did warm it up, and I spurred him and everything else. And turned around and rode him back up there. And old Clell said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to try it again." So I rode him right up to the same place, and that old mule knew that he was lifting that line on him, but he just stood there and kind of snorted and quivered. But he sure never tried to break a run. And Clell handed me the line. I got him up in front of him, and he run and got his mule, and we rode right over and had old Thunder and Red with us, and rode right over to old Keith Brown, rode up in the yard and hollered, and he is at home, and he come out. Dang, he says, "Where'd you tie up that thing?" We said, "Right here in your horse pasture." "Boy," he says, "I'm glad to see that." And I said, "We don't know if you'll do us a favor." He said, "What's that?" I said, "We want to borrow a truck to take this line plumb around the mountain over there to Gardner Canyon up to that Sweetwater camp. That's where we're camped doing some line hunting. And we wanted to know if we could borrow you a truck." He said, "Boy," he says, "I'll loan you a truck and a driver so he can bring it back." And so Clell just loaded the line and old Red and Thunder in that pickup, and I said, "I'll take the mules back across the mountain." So I took them across and got in there late that afternoon then, of course, and Clell had already got there and had old Red and Thunder tied up and taken care of, and some of them other hounds that came in by that time. And then he already had the line in the cage and already had it shut up and had water in there for it and all that. And then so then an old boy with the name of Jack Pinkerton, he came to camp that evening, and we went over there the next morning, and we caught the young. This was the old female, which was lucky because we knew that those others would stay around there. And the next morning, well, we treed the young female, and we roped and tied her. And that day we had 6 or 8 hounds with us, like we always did. But you know, that was the only time on that hunt we had any trouble on running deer. They never, and old Jack, of course, he helped us some, but he was in the way just about as much as he was help. But anyway, we brought it back and put it in a cage, and that made 2. Then in the next 2 days then, well, we treed those other 2. But Clell and I, Pinkerton left, and Clell and I was by ourselves, just he and I. And when we treed the one the next day then, well, he is a nice line. He'd have weighed probably 105 pounds or something like that. He is pretty doggone nice young male. He would have made a good big line in 2 or 3 or 4 more years. He'd have made a big line. And all right, it's up in an oak tree, and we got down and walked up to it and didn't have any of the dogs, had 7 or 8, didn't have any of them tied, and old Clell just walked up and just took his rope and raised up and roped and caught that thing right around the neck. And it just bailed out over a limb, but it hung down low enough that the dogs could jump and grab it. And then he hollered to me, "Tie those hounds." Well, I had my leashes there in my hands, but I run down there, and of course, I couldn't grab those dogs in time. And finally, I told him, I said, "What do you think I am? How many hands do you think I got? Do you think I can handle all 8 of these dogs at once?" And he said, "Well, what'll we do?" I said, "Drop that line, was a choking pretty bad and was just about unconscious." I said, but I hadn't let them grab him enough to hurt him. And I said, "Well, drop him right amongst them." He dropped that line right amongst them, and we grabbed sticks and knocked those dogs back. And then one of us would stand over the line, and the other one would tie them. And there's good places there to tie those dogs, and we had them tied just as that line was a-coming too good. We got our dogs tied, and you know we tied that line up, and it didn't hurt him a doggone bit. And so then the next day, well, we went back over there, and of course this other young male was in there, and he was just as good a line as the other one. And we caught him, and by golly, we roped and tied him. And you know, tying those 4 lines, we had them up 25 trees. And you know, that made a tree dog out of that old Thunder. And he was a doggone good hound from then on, and was a good tree dog. And that brought his value up at least 50 to 75%. Just those 4 lines and those 25 trees. And that was good experience for those young dogs too. We really got them to going, and we never had trouble with that bunch after that running deer like we did before, because they really got to know what lines was. And not only that, we made some money out of the lines, and we sure did help our dogs. He walked up. Well, now this is about a jaguar hunt. The first time we ever went into the swamps of Nayarit, Mexico, with a seasoned bunch of hunters. And this one old fellow was old Fred Crawford from Everett, Pennsylvania. And them swamps are bad. Well, he got out in them swamps, and he said, I just can't do it. I don't want to go out in there because I'm afraid of those swamps. And he told me, he says, you get out here and get me a jaguar, and I'll take it, because I want to put it in a museum in Breezewood, Pennsylvania that I'm a-building. And I'm going to do a lot of hunting, and I'm going to build a big museum there. And I want a lot of mounted game in it. And he did, in years to come. He'd hunted all over the world, but that is some of the first hunting, big game hunting that he'd ever done. And I laughed at him. He got down in those camp there, and the moon come up, and he said, I wonder if that's the same moon that you see in Pennsylvania. And he was serious about it. He must have been an educated man in some ways, because he had really made the money in his business, but by golly, he wasn't in others. And I just laughed, and I said, yeah, Mr. Crawford, I think that's the same moon. But anyway, well, we had a young Mexican boy there. Oh, he was 18, 20 years old, Dionisio Ramirez, and helping us. And he says, you know, way down here, this was in the spring of the year. He says, at this time last year, we heard 7 jaguars roar at the same time. Well, I had an old cow horn that we had for quite a while that had the first jaguars that any of us had ever heard roar answered the call of this horn.